Hey folks, Dr. Pete Hilgartner here, Leesburg, Virginia. I wanted to just give a quick rundown on a question that I get asked a lot of times. Very simply, what is it that you do? Well, I am a chiropractor. My wife, Dr. Lynn Hilgartner, is also a chiropractor and a certified nutritional specialist. We're both also trained in functional medicine. I've got more training in functional neurology, rehabilitation. And what we do is really a different paradigm. So I like to give an explanation of what healthcare is in our definition relative to the healthcare system we have right now. And I'll rather call that the sick care or the disease care system, because that's really what it is. So a healthcare system, in our point of view, is really a systems approach to optimizing your genetic potential. And I'll explain that in a little bit. A disease or a sick care system is really driven by symptoms rather than balancing systems. And think about what we have today. We've got a system where people run to the doctor when they have bleeding, pus, blood, something broken, fractured, infected, or cancer. And it's appropriate to do that, but there's a whole progression of things that occur before that happens, unless it's just an overt trauma, okay? So really, symptoms is what drives people to the doctor, and when they have symptoms, they look at it as if it's an entity that just appeared, and they're going to do one of three things to it. They're going to give it some drugs, they're going to give it some, they're going to burn it, or they're going to radiate it, okay? So think of chemotherapy. It's going to be radiation, surgery, or chemotherapy. So it's really poison, cut, burn. We can categorize all of those things. I don't say that facetiously, but that's how you can categorize things. And it also doesn't mean that it's inappropriate. What we get a lot of times in the healthcare and traditional medicine is it's us or them, rather than it's both and. And we believe that it's truly both and, but the focus in a healthcare system should really be on optimizing your genetic potential and leading you that way rather than allowing you to trickle downstream and go that way till you go over the waterfall, if that makes sense as an analogy. So we like to tell people that the healthcare system we have today, the disease and sickness care system, is really made up of firemen. It's the fire department. You don't call the fire department until you've got some smoke or flames. But have you ever seen a house after the fire department left? All of a sudden they come in with their water, their axes, their sledgehammers, their ladders, and boom, they put the fire out. But what do you have left? Can you live in that house? Typically no. Or if there is, if you can, there's a lot of damage. So now how are you going to restore that house back to normal function? Well, that's where we come in, okay? We're the frumpy guys that come in the old coveralls, and we're the restoration and maintenance crew. But let me ask you this, what would happen if I was able to prevent that fire in the first place? What would happen if I had proper inspections and maintenance to keep me from having that fire? Or more importantly, what if I had the approach where I'm going to optimize the potential of that structure? In your case, it's your body. So let me go back to the beginning of how I shift this paradigm for people and explain something. And at the beginning, we got half from mom, half from dad, right? Our genetics. And what you and I were all taught, because we're all taught genetic determinism, you have high blood pressure because your parents had it. You're obese because your parents were obese. You have depression because your parents had depression. We're taught right out of the gate, you get half from mom, half from dad, and you know what? You happen to just be screwed. That's it. Sorry. Well, how depressing to come into life knowing that you're sentenced right from day one to have a stroke or have high blood pressure or have cancer or whatever. And basically, what's your approach going to be in terms of health care? You're going to be thinking, well, you know, it really doesn't matter what I do. I'm just going to get it anyway. I'm doomed. Well, I want to tell you that that paradigm is false. It's not that you can't have certain genes that predispose you to certain things. And in some cases, there are genetic mutations that mean you will have something like Tay-Sachs syndrome, all right? But that's a genetic mutation. It's not a genetic predisposition, okay? But if we look at the field of epigenetics, it's a new burgeoning field, and the pharmaceutical companies are well aware of this. In fact, they're doing a lot of research to figure out, well, what specific drug can I put in that body to either up or down regulate that specific gene so that a person gets this expression. So it's actually moving them a little bit closer to more of a wellness type of model, okay? But epi means above or around in Latin. And what that really means is that I have my little file cabinet full of genes that can potentially express all sorts of different ways, and then they're going to interact with this thing we call life. And life is stress, whether we like it or not, but nothing grows without stress. You don't grow muscles without working them. You don't grow your brain without working it, without taxing it, without challenging it, okay? So we're designed to be a stimulus-response system from day one. But our life is made up of physical, emotional, and chemical, and even spiritual stressors. And by the way, the body works as a single synchronized functional unit, so when you have one of these stressors, you have all of them. It affects all of those systems, okay? So I'm just going to take a physical one, working out. If I work my muscles, if I work my cardiovascular or cardiopulmonary system enough, I'm going to tap into that genetic potential and I'm going to upregulate it to adapt, meaning I'm going to get bigger, faster, stronger, or smarter relative to my environment. Correct? Okay. But what happens if I keep pushing that system? I push it beyond its real limits. I overtrain. Let me back up and focus on here again. And this gets a little bit more into theoretical physics rather than philosophy or theology, but at this point of conception, something happened that's much bigger than just, boom, sperm and an egg meeting, exchange of gametes, mitosis and meiosis. There was an actual ignition of energy there. There was something that lit this whole little system up. And it had a primary mandate. And that primary mandate, at that point of ignition, at that point of conception, said, at the very least, buddy, do whatever you can to survive. That's the primary mandate of any biological system. At least survive. We haven't even gotten to propagating the species, okay? It's just at least survive. But there's also the potential at that point of conception that says, hey, there's an optimal picture of who you are at the age of 10, 20, 50, 80, maybe even 100. And that's on that trajectory. But remember, there's this interaction with this thing we call life, physical, emotional, chemical, spiritual stressors. So as long as I challenge my genome with those stressors enough to optimize my genetic potential, I'm going to adapt. But the Goldilocks story applies. There's too much, there's too little, and there's just enough. If I exceed my threshold of adaptation, because of my primary mandate to survive, my body is going to figure out how to compensate. It's going to figure out how to rob Peter to pay Paul. But by definition, a compensation is not adaptation. A compensation is losing my ability to adapt. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's a degradation of that overall system. So I'm starting to head down that way. Because here's the paradox. The more I compensate, the less adaptable I become. The more I'm prone to compensate, the less adaptable I become. The more prone to compensate, less adaptable. And you can see where that goes until physical matter has its limitations and I cross a threshold. Now, this threshold is either pain or symptoms of some sort, and this is the realm of the medical doctors. This is where they live. And thank God we've got them. If you have a sucking chest wound or you knock a hand off, I'm not the guy that you want to see, okay? If you have an acute infection and it's life-threatening, you don't want me. You want these guys. And this is where they are. And let's just go to another analogy. I like to use analogies because they create a picture in your mind. But let's say up in here, this whole genetic potential is like a lake. And you should hang out in sort of the middle of this lake, and that's expressing your potential. But we get blown off course because of the stressors of life, and we end up in this little bubbling brook, and it goes into a stream, that goes into a river, into a bigger river, and all of a sudden I find myself in the rapids here. And how many of you have ever known this or maybe experienced this on your own? You go to the physician and he says, well, you know, you're borderline, you know, come back in 6 months and I'll treat you when you have a problem. That makes about as much sense as me telling you, you know what, hey, you're in the rapids, water falls downstream a little bit, when you go over, give me a yell and I'll throw you a lifeline. Do you see the analogy? All right. But, thank God that they're there and they can throw the lifeline, they get you back up. But when they do get you back up, they're going to put you right back up on this little rock here. It's a slippery rock, by the way. And it's just where you were the day before you crossed that threshold. And it's going to be either using drugs, surgery, or some other procedure that falls into my poison, cut, burn approach. All right? And again, they've saved your life. Now, the question is, how are you going to get back up here? That's what we do. So they've put the fire out, they saved the house, but now you have to reconstruct it. You need the regeneration, the restoration and maintenance crew to come in. And this is what we do. And this is health care. This here is disease care. It's sickness care. So when we had this big national debate about health care and everybody's right to have health care, you know what? I'll tell you what your right is. Your right is to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, I agree with that. And it's your responsibility to take care of your health care to avoid the need for sickness care. And that's what we do. But there's an inherent personal responsibility that comes into that for you to do the right things. Now, there's some tools and some principles that we can apply very quickly to this system to restore balance to your ecosystem, to bring you back up to more of an adaptation response rather than a compensation response. And real quickly, I'll get into more of this in another video, but real quickly, there's 3 things that you have to do to bring balance to any ecosystem. That's really what your body is. It's an ecosystem that's governed by the laws of biology. The same laws that apply to any other mammalian system. Number 1, I have to remove all toxins and noxious stimuli. Remove all toxins and noxious stimuli. If you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is to stop digging. Okay? But then remove the stimuli and the noxious things, the chemicals, the environmental influences. It could be bad, people that are bad for you. Okay? It could be food that's bad for you. It could be all kinds of different toxins in your environment. Most people are thinking, well, smog, food chemicals, additives, preservatives, all that. True. That's absolutely true. But look at the rest of what you're doing. What's your posture like? What kind of car or seat are you sitting in? That has a big bearing on your neurological well-being, which drives and governs the function of every cell in your body. Okay? Then we have to look at sufficiency of needs, providing sufficiency of needs. And what I mean by that is all in context of physical, emotional, chemical, spiritual needs. The Goldilocks story. Too much is too much, too little is too little, just right for you. And what's just right for me may be a little different than what's right for you because we all have our own genetic makeup, if that makes sense. And the final thing is we need to optimize communication. And what I mean by that is inter and intracellular communication. The nervous system and your brain govern and control every system and function in your body. You're constantly gathering information through all the various sensors, and every cell in your body, every organ and tissue in your body are constantly communicating to your brain, and there's always data going into the command center. It's being processed, interpreted, and commands are going out. And it's constant and continuous, but it's not just happening inside your body. It's also your brain is, through the perception centers of the brain, relating you to your external environment. So it's your systems approach is your body's ability to maintain its singular and individual homeostasis relative to a greater environment. And that term is called allostasis. In fact, there's a great book written about that, simply titled Allostasis. It's allostasis, okay? It's about your homeostasis relative to the balance, the homeostasis of the greater whole. Okay? So right there, that's a kind of a paradigm shift for a lot of people about what a healthcare system is, or what I like to tell people, this is the wellness paradigm. It's about optimizing your genetic potential relative to your environment to allow you to to thrive most fully and achieve your peak potential for health and happiness. I hope that helped.